Greetings ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to today's Reddit series video from the subreddit HFY called Glintstone Chapter 16, Crazy Bastard. The gentle sound of humming pulled me out of my sleep. I lay there, my eyes shut and my mind blank, just listening to that humming. It rose and fell in a rhythmic cadence. Was that the tune of Lady in the Garden? Yes, it was. I hadn't heard that since my mother had sang it to me when I was young and refused to sleep. I opened my eyes and I saw that I was in a warm, green room, very similar to other hospital rooms that I'd been in over the course of my life. Most of them had been after I met Clint. I rolled my head to the side and I saw that the door was open and the nurse stood outside, going about her rounds checking the clipboards outside the rooms. She was the one who was humming. She looked up and glanced into my room. "Oh," she exclaimed in a soft, measured tone. "You're awake?" The nurse bustled inside, her hands fiddling with the stethoscope. She slipped it into her pockets and then she reached into my bedside. "How are you feeling?" she asked as she reached for my arm. I was lightheaded, my stomach felt like it was trying to climb out through my throat, and my body was weaker than a wet noodle. "Fine," I said. The nurse pressed her fingers into my wrist and counted my heart rate. She said as she busied herself with a light. "Look here, please," she said, pointing over her ear. She spoke as she gave me a brief examination. "You've survived a great ordeal, Mr. Jakku. The amount of flow in your system and the mountain's tear should have killed you. Nearly did, in fact. If you had arrived here any later, you would have died for sure." "Excuse me, what was that you said about drugs in my system?" I asked her, concerned. What was a mountain's tear? She reached down and lifted up a clipboard and at the end of my bed, and she flipped through several pages before arriving at the one that she wanted. "It says that when you were admitted, you had 4 times the lethal dose of mountain's tear and twice the lethal dose of flow. Either of those would—" "What's a mountain's tear?" She looked at me. "Don't tell me you don't know what that is. With that much, your nerves would have been on fire. It would have very much seemed like I had molten steel coming through my veins," I finished. She nodded. "So that's what the Quantum had injected me with." "Where did you come across it?" she asked. "It's a very rare substance, and—" The bell beeped, and she glanced down at the communicator. "I've got to run," she said, looking up, "but I'll send the doctor in as soon as I can." She walked through the door and disappeared. I rested my head back against the pillow and closed my eyes, savoring the feel of the soft bedding and the fact that I was no longer subjected to the pain. I had almost dozed off when I was interrupted by the loud footsteps that stopped right by my bed. I opened my eyes and saw Bahone standing by my side. Why was it always him? "Are you a masochist?" he asked me, looking sternly at me. I furrowed my brow. "What? No," I said, and surprised that he would even ask that. He sighed and rubbed his forehead. "Every time I've seen you in a hospital bed, it's because you reach your body's limits and ask, 'Hey, what happens if I do more?'" He thrust his arm out, indicating their present state. "This is what happens. Not only do you push your body beyond the point where it should shut down. Here, I find you doped up on flow and mountain's tear. Where in the hell did you get mountain's tear anyway?" Bahone seemed so much more concerned than he should have been. He was my doctor, not my father. "Relax," I told him. "I'll tell you where." I told him how I met Muiena, and I told him how she wanted my help. I skipped over the part where she bribed me with sex. I told him about the arm and the crazy Quantum. I skimmed over the details of my rage, but I did tell him I took care of it. And then I blacked out and ended up here. Bones looked at me with a strange expression on his face. "You did all of that for someone you didn't even know?" "Yes," I said. "Bones was a doctor. He should understand doing everything you can to help someone." He shook his head. "You and Clint are something, you know that." He pulled a piece of thin wood from his pocket and twirled it between his fingers. "Take care of yourself," he said as he turned to leave. "Where are you going?" I asked. "You're not going to check me over and make sure that I'm all right?" "The nurse already did that, and besides, if you've lived this long, you should be fine." I watched stunned as he walked through the door. I was still watching when Clint walked in. "You crazy bastard! You went and took out a whole gang without me!" Clint's voice sounded equal parts surprised, disappointed, and proud. He made to give me a hug, looked at me in the hospital bed, and apparently decided against it, and patted me on the shoulder instead. "How'd you find out?" I asked, surprised that he already knew. How? It's only the talk of the city. Some crazy guy went down into the Undercity and took out 20 mobsters by himself. Not to mention they say that he's like a demon incarnate. Clint's eyes seemed misty. I had not seen this reaction from him before. I wondered what it meant. Demon? How do they know this? Clint smiled. Apparently some guy brought you back up here and then went to tell everyone about it. Hold on. How long have I been here? I asked. It had to have been a fairly long time if the news had spread that far. You've been in here for 3 days, Clint said. I visited every day, but you were still unconscious. You've got to tell me what happened down there. 3 days? Wait, I'm missing the meeting with Nora Mac, didn't I? Clint shrugged. It's no big deal. He understood completely. I'll fill you in on what he had to say after you tell me what happened down in the Undercity. Clint looked happy and eager to hear about it, so I told him. Not everything, but much more than Bohones. I did tell him about Wayena, but I kept my rage to myself. I wasn't sure what to make of it, and I wasn't going to tell anyone else until I could think it over myself. It was interesting watching Clint's face change his expressions as I elaborated on my ordeal. When I told him about Wayena and me, he grinned. When I told him about the kidnapped girl, his face grew dark. I told him about the torture and how I got free. When I got to the part where I found Wayena and her sister dead, I thought he might explode with rage. When I told him how I handled Canton, he nodded with approval. Less than the bastard deserved, he muttered. I finished up by waking up here. Wow, Clint said, leaning back in his chair. He had grabbed halfway through my story. You're all grown up now. I never thought that I'd see the Jahan I knew back in the old days that would turn into such a warrior. I'm going to have to let you train some of the new people. What new people? I asked. I didn't know anything about new people. Clint leaned forward in his chair, resting his elbows on his knees. This is what we've been waiting for. We're about to wage war on the Empire. Let me explain, he said, noticing my confused look. Nora Mac has made a special unit. Their mission is to go into swarm-controlled space and cause as much damage as possible. The Empire's eyes have gotten a little too close to Aldemir, and Normac wants to distract them. Clint waved a hand, and that's where we come in. We, he motioned to himself and me, and a few other fighters are going to go deep into the Empire territory, and we're going to start our own rebellion. We're going to go gather some beings who feel the same way that we do, and make them into an army. And we're going to go cause as much damage to the Empire's infrastructure as we can. I'm talking about shipyards, slave lots, military camps, supply depots, you name it, and we'll probably destroy it. But this is a very dangerous mission, and only volunteers will go. You in? I didn't even have to think about it. Hell yes. Good, Clint said. We leave tomorrow. End of chapter. Clintstone, chapter number 17. Understand. I didn't leave in the morning. I didn't leave for another week. The doctors, with whom Bohones was not a part of, told me that I was nowhere near fit enough for combat. They told me, in no uncertain terms, that I was to remain in the bed for 2 more days. Then they were going to allow me to walk around. After that, they would let me go. Clint walked in the day that we were supposed to leave. He was dressed in battle clothes, overcoat, dark pants, and a red shirt. He sat down in the chair and looked at me lying on the bed. I heard they're not letting you out of here for another week, he said. I shrugged. 2 days, then I get to walk around for 5, and then they'll let me leave. I winked at him, but I plan on busting out of here soon. Clint pushed himself up and stood close to my bed. He poked a finger in my chest. You're not leaving here until you're better. I'm not going to have you die on me because you'll work your body past the limits. I'll tie you down myself if I have to. No, I shout, no chains! Clint flinched, stunned by the force of my reaction. I was shocked too. I hadn't meant to be so forceful, but thought of the chains restricting my movement, allowing someone to do what they wanted. I shivered. I'm sorry, I said. I'll be fine. You can trust me. Clint nodded. I never doubted it. I'll come back to you in a week. Hopefully by then we'll have a base and some idea of what to do next. I look forward to it. Who's leading the squad? Clint looked down at me. I am. I stifled a laugh. You? They'll all be dead in a week from exhaustion. You managed to keep up just fine, even in the beginning, before your sudden growth spurt. Besides, Clint said, waving his hand. "That's the whole point of the squad. The official purpose is some behind-the-scenes destruction and mayhem, but what they really want is an army just like you and me." "I don't know if that's going to be a good idea," I said. "I mean, look at us. Between us, we've managed to kill about 1,500 beings, and we haven't even started a real war yet. Do you really want an army that only knows how to kill?" I realized after the words left my mouth that I should not have said them. It sounded like I thought that we were good for nothing except for killing. We were good at it, no one better, but someone who just kills and not someone to admire. Clint looked at me with a dark look that he gets sometimes, but it was not directed at me. I think that it was a thought of what he really was and we all were. We were known for killing. We saved people too, but usually we killed people as well. "I think we're going to need all the killers we can find," Clint said. "The Swarm outnumber us about 100 to 1, and they have a great many more resources than we do. And, on a dark note, I must take my leave. See you in a week," he said, already halfway out the door. He waved his hand over his shoulder and then disappeared in the hallway. I lay back in my pillow and I stared up at the ceiling. My body had still not recovered and I was exhausted. I fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. When I woke up, the clock read 11 o'clock for the next day. I had slept for over 24 hours. I must have really pushed my body. I understood why the doctors had made me stay behind. With my body like this, I wouldn't have been able to be of use to the squad. A nurse walked in a short while later. She gave me a quick glancing over, made sure that I was doing all right, and I asked if I wanted anything to read from the hospital library. "No," I said, "I'm fine, but could you send in Dr. McCoy if you get a chance? I'd like to speak with him." "I'm sorry, but Dr. McCoy has been in Numabi Hospital for the last week. He won't be back for a month. Do you want me to have him messaged?" No, it'll be fine." I waved my hand absently, consumed in thought. The nurse left when I didn't say that I needed anything else. If Bohones wasn't here and hadn't been here for the last week or two, then who? But that couldn't be right. I had seen him with my own 2 eyes, and I had been tired, yes, but I trusted myself enough to distinguish between 2 beings. But he hadn't been acting like himself. I shook my head, and the ridiculousness of it all. But I kept turning it over and over in my head, thinking that if I saw it from another light, the puzzle would become clear. But it didn't, and all I got for my troubles was a dull ache behind my brow. I was sitting there, consumed by my thoughts, when the most unexpected visitor walked through the door. It was Lady Knight. "Hello," she said when I looked up. I had no idea how long she'd been standing there. "Oh, hello, Lady Knight." I sat up taller in my bed, motioning to the chair. I said, "Please make yourself comfortable." I would stand, but the doctor's orders. I smiled ruefully. "Please call me Jane," she said as she seated herself in the chair. Her movements were very precise and measured, giving her an impression that she was a great care to appear more control of her actions. She wanted me to call her Jane. That meant a lot, according to Clint. "What brings you by, Lady, Jane?" That was going to be a tough habit to break. "I thought I'd give you some company," she said. "Clint's off on a mission, and I've got to leave for a diplomatic meeting tomorrow. But I thought that you could use someone to distract yourself from the boredom." "You guessed right," I said. "What do you want to talk about?" "I don't know, really. I thought I'd just get to know you a bit more, since we're going to be seeing a lot more of each other in the future." "You and Clint that serious, huh?" She shrugged. "He's a quiet man where..." She stopped suddenly, as if preventing herself from saying anything more than she meant to. "He loves you, you know, really, truly." Her face lit up. "He loves you too, but not in that way," she said quickly, raising a hand. "But, like a brother, he'd do anything for you." I had known that, but it still felt good for someone else to confirm it. And I would do anything for him. We fell into an easy conversation after that, discussing the various aspects of Clint that we found ridiculous and yet at the same time intriguing. I told her about our adventures, giving her a different perspective on things that Clint had told her. And she told me about Clint and baseball. That was a fascinating sport, and one only Clint could have thought of. Who else would have thought to make a game out of hitting a ball as hard as you can and running as fast as you can in a circle? But soon she had to leave and I was left by myself again. The nurse came in to give me my supper, but that was the only other contact that I had that day. I sat there and soon fell asleep. The next day, They let me out in the condition that I didn't get into any more fights, and I wandered through the city, looking for my house. I had never actually gone to it before. I had just spent the night at Wiena's, and then I was chained to a table for 3 days. When I did find the house, it was a small little structure built much the same as the rest of the houses in this part of the town. It had 2 bedrooms, a living room, a kitchen, a washroom, and several closets, perfect for a guy who had very little in his name. I found that Clint had left my things on my bed instead of taking them with him on Susan, which I was grateful for. I had nothing to do for the next 4 days. I didn't know what I was going to do, but I knew what I wasn't going to do. I was going to stay as far away from trouble as possible. That's what I told myself. I did well for the first 2 days, staying inside, cooking meals and reading a few of the books Clint had left in the house. I had known how much he liked reading until we got a steady place to stay, and then it seemed to be devoured every book that he could get his hands on. The 3rd night, I couldn't stand it. I had to get out of the house. I wandered into the market and I traveled to the bars. I didn't drink anything because I didn't know what would happen to me, but I did talk a lot to people, and many of them recognized me as the guy who tore apart the arm. Many congratulated me and offered me a drink, which I politely declined. Eventually, after a long evening and people meeting, I was on my way home. The streets were mostly empty, as it was late at night, and this was the lower end of town. I cut through an alley to get home faster when 2 shapes stepped out from the wall, blocking my path. "Give us your wallet, and things will go smoothly," one of them shapes said, a metal glinting in his hand. They were trying to rob me. I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. "You really don't want to do that," I said. "Yeah, why's that?" warranted the other one. "Because I'm the jihad who fights. I spent the last week trying my best not to kill people, and my patience is running thin. I need to kill soon." I spoke in my best Clint's voice, that low, hushed whisper that sounds so much more dangerous than shouting. "I don't give a flying frick who you are. I want your wallet," shrilled one with the knife. Well, I tried. I took a step forward and saw them recoil in terror. Good. Then I noticed they were looking over my shoulder. They turned and ran fast as their legs could carry them. I turned around to face a being at my back. It was Kraut, all 6.5 feet of him. He stood massive in the hallway, his hands by his sides. "Thanks," I said, "but I could have handled them." "I do not doubt you could, but this way no one has to die." His voice was a little slurred and uneven. "Have you been drinking?" I asked. He hiccuped. "Yes, and I need to speak with you. Is there a place close?" "I've got a house just up the road," I told him. "We can talk there." I led him to my house and through the front door. He sat heavily on the couch in the living room, causing it to creak violently. I half expected it to break. I took the other chair. "What was it that you wanted to talk about?" He looked at me with beady eyes, dulled by drink. "I know your mission in the Empire territory. I want to tell you something that will be very important to your mission." I leaned forward. "Okay, what is it?" He drew a deep breath. "I know you and most of the people in the rebellion think that the Swarm are evil and that they'll enslave and kill and murder. You are justified in thinking this, because that is all you know about us. The only contact the galaxy has with the Swarm race is with the military and its slavers. Most have great reason to wish the death of our race, none more so than Clint Stone. What happened to Earth is one of the greatest crimes that my people have committed, but you need to know that it is not the Swarm race that did these things." He paused and I grew very confused. How were the Swarm not responsible for the last 100 years of misery and enslavement of billions? "It's our leaders, you see. The Emperor and the government rule over us with an iron fist. Those who disagree or speak out against the leadership are silenced, killed if they're lucky, or sent to re-education camps if they are not. Those places are one of the greatest sights of misery and pain. You can't even begin to imagine the things that I've seen there." "Why tell you this, you ask? What good is it? I just want you to know that they're not all bad. Most of us are decent beings. We want to be left in peace, raise a family, work a quiet job. But government has created a state of terror. Those who disagree are sent to the camps." "But why don't we rise up against the rulers?" "I don't know," Kraut said, his voice thick with sorrow and regret. He rambled on, fueled by the drink. I doubted very much that he would have shared this much without it. We're scared. The army works for the Emperor and the secret police are everywhere. He shivered. During my time as the home guard, the things I saw. No living being should have witnessed those things. I left the Empire, joined the rebellion because I saw those things. He looked up at me, fire blazing in his eyes. The Emperor, who is to blame for this war, him and his family stretching back 3 generations. It was the house of Yethosa that brought this war. Those sick, twisted bastards decided that ruling over an entire people was not enough, and that they decided that they wanted the rest of the galaxy as well. He jabbed a finger at me. You remember that when you find yourself on the Sworn world, those who live there are not evil. They are not ruthless murderers who wish to see everything crushed beneath their feet. They are people, just like you, who just got caught up in something outside of their control. You have to understand this. He stood and walked out the door. I stood quickly. Hey, wait, I've got a question for you. But he did not listen. He left the door and he soon disappeared into the night. I sat back down hard in the chair processing what I just heard. From what I understood from Korort Drunken's rambling, it wasn't the will of the Sworn people that they go to war, but rather the Emperor alone. Because he had control of the military and the secret police, he could force them to do as he wished, because they were afraid of him. This information was far-reaching implications. We weren't fighting an entire race in this war, just those who fought because they had to. They were definitely those who fought because they wanted to, but many were likely forced to choose between a military and death. This meant that the Swarm Empire was fighting 2 wars, one against outside aggressors and one for the minds of their people. This could change everything, but why had Korort not told anyone about this before? I could guess why. He was a proud being, not one to suggest cowardice to his people, even if he disagreed with the leadership. It must have taken a lot to come and speak with me. I sat back and I thought about what I'd heard through the wee hours of the dawn, and when I heard footsteps outside the door, I thought perhaps Korort had returned, but it was someone else. Clint bounded into the living room, ready to go. End of chapter.
Greetings ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to today's Reddit series video from the subreddit HFY, called